I'm gonna bring some cookies. Of course, I've been.
You're bringing me cookies?
Beautifully put.
You're bringing me cookies?
Beautifully put.
You're bringing me cookies?
Beautifully put.
You're bringing me cookies?
Beautifully put. Yeah. Um, we're gonna. This is our official ending, but we're all sticking around because we never end. We always continue. Um, we want to thank you all for coming by. Rodrigo, you made it, man.
Barely.
Hi, Rodrigo.
You're-
Hang out, or you just
we're hanging out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eli, what you mentioned the idea of like the body allowing itself to be intelligent.
Yeah, the body allowing itself to be intelligent. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that we like we're really scared of our bodies, you know, and we're scared of each other's bodies, and especially in the United States where sexuality is so fucked up, the sort of Protestant, you know, roots of, I mean, like, we get information from our bodies and we're like, nope, that's a thing I'm supposed to turn off, you know, like that is not trustable information. That, you know, and so I think that like we so sort of turn off our mechanisms, and like when we start to try to find our footing again, it feels extremely foreign. It feels alien because the body feels alien, because each other feel alien, because we've actually been told that things are built to become obsolete. They're built to be hard to fix. They're built to not adapt. Every new Apple comes out and you can't, you know, Macs or something, you can't use the tech from a year ago. Like it's built for that. And so we're built for that, right? To kind of like have our original programming kind of become obsolete. I use a lot, and I find this really useful, the difference between like having, if we had been taught how to human, which is like a class that I teach, versus like how to institution, right? So if you think about your body having learned like how to institution and how to replicate like ideas and systems and compounds and language like that actually like reproduce things, and insofar as that, you know, as that system becomes normative for us, we start to produce institutions within our own body that become really hard to get rid of.
Yeah, obsolescence is a big thing, especially in poetry. I mean, Rodrigo, you sort of talk about that a little bit, how it's sort of a fixed obsolescence, and it's sort of our job as poets to kind of either undermine that or just bring it out into the open to see what's guiding us, what we're in control of, and how poetry allows another perception of where those mechanisms can exist.
I don't know if maybe this is sort of tangential to what you were saying, but I think that in the last 2 months, what really the kind of poetry that I would, the only kind of poetry that I would imagine for myself is what I would just generally call like flame out poetry. Like this is it, or close to it, with no promises of any of another poem forthcoming. I think that's the only kind of way that I can even imagine writing something. I think that the whole project poetry, where you sort of you preconceive a sort of a conceit rather, and you sort of fill it in with all these modules, and you build your little city of meaning and all that. I just wow, and I've done that kind of poetry for sure. It just seems like something I can't imagine. So I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Christine, you're like how you're working with like you mentioned before, you're making something not sure what it's going to be yet, like the videos and everything. I think there's a sense. Actually that's sort of what Rodrigo's saying in a way. It's like all here, but we don't know what it's going to be, and that it's okay to not know. And sometimes as writers, we kind of have like such a fixed thing in mind to have this be for something, and to be in this sort of like a free fall is liberating. But then the reason for the free fall is not. So there's a paradox there of some sort.
I'm not entirely sure how to respond to that, Edwin, but I'll say this will be my response. I'm personally in the process of moving my life to Buenos Aires. I go there 6 months every year. I'm learning Spanish and studying psychoanalysis. And unfortunately, I can't go now, but I was supposed to be going this summer. You know, I'm doing this because I want an analysis myself. And I've had one before, but it didn't work. But this one is what it's having the effect on me is of liberating my body, because I store all my tension in my joints, particularly down my spine. And so I'm finding that literally my body's in some free-fall state at the moment. And outside of my teaching, I don't want to think. I just want to try and find ways to let my body itself speak, and putting myself in front of the Zoom and just moving myself somehow is my way of letting my body somehow finding a way to speak in images. I don't know if it can make sounds or poetry. It just seems to want to speak in images. It is my body that's speaking, not me or my mind, which are three separate entities for me.
Gina, unmute yourself.
Got it. I always forget.
Wondering how you're. Yes, you've always created work that's very that is obviously body centric, but also how you're taking the world in, and how we're talking about allowing and like that push pull of some sort. How do you work with space?
In a few ways, I deal with it visually as if it were an entire world or building or photograph or stage. So it has its visual callings or clues for me. And then it's visceral. Space is visceral. Believe it or not, air is visceral and viscous. So it has texture. And the thing about when you train in dance, when you study dance, one of the things you learn about is dimension. So you've got a lot of choices. Just like when you're building a building, they've got all those choices to put up walls and doors and windows and whatnot. Generally, architecture is linear and dance is not. But architecture doesn't need to be linear, it's just stupidly linear. But dance does not need to be linear and is not stupid. So I think that might have answered your question. It's also sensual.
Well, if you're working with that.
Sensorial, it has smell and taste and sound, and you feel it, and your skin is involved in kind of a digestion with it. You're tasting it, and there's a kind of an old adage from when I was a young dancer, where teachers and coaches would tell us to eat the space. That when we were inside of a room working on a solo or something, or whatever it was we were doing, that you make a gesture, your body is eating space. So, kind of makes sense, but it's very helpful when you're a dancer to really take that on.
So during these times, with the space change the way it is now in the times, how has that affected how you're moving?
You mean quarantine space?
Yeah.
Oh, well, what's happened is really interesting, and I did not expect this to happen. But space is one thing, physical space, and not being in class and not being with other dancers, that's one thing. And I thought that was going to be a nightmare, and it is a nightmare. But what's happening that's actually really amazing, that I didn't expect, is the psychological and emotional space. Dance is a very difficult art form, and there's a lot of judgment and pursuit of perfection. and a lot of pressure about being seen and about seeing oneself. There's mirrors. You're looking at yourself all the time. You're seeing your flaws. You try to turn, you fall down. That's really obvious. That's a problem. And you do this in public. So being in quarantine has like really been amazing, because suddenly I don't even have the capacity to judge myself. I don't have professional mirrors and studio in my little apartment on East 11th Street. I just have a corner, like the edge of my piano, that I give myself bar. And I see little pieces of myself in reflections. And so all of that pressure has gone away and been replaced with a fantasy life. And we forget how vibrant and valuable a fantasy life is in art. It certainly works for children. And we just totally forget about that when we grow up. And so the consequence of me being locked up with my music and my piano and my point shoes is that suddenly all these things that I used to allow myself to dream of doing, I'm allowing myself to dream of doing. It's really fun.
Great. Thank you. Any thoughts from anybody? It's funny because at a cocktail party, we could look at each other across the room and then do this and then come back to you. Now we're all just looking. So it's a different, the openings are different.
Your sound has been bad, Edwin. I hear like an air fryer. It's like there's a reading and there's a cuchifrito happening at the same time, which is usually a nice combination.
Dude, it's been that way for the whole, I don't know, man. I gotta.
Rodrigo, I was really interested in what you were saying about your writing in this time and how you just write to write this one piece. And I'm wondering, do you wait for another poem to come to you now, or do you have an instinct about sitting down when another one's going to arrive? You know, because you were expressing that how you're writing is this.
Well, the whole mystery of volition is something that's constant with me, way before this crisis. So now with this whole thing, intentionality, it seems something that's so far away. I think that we're multiple. And this is cliche, but I think that we're multiple selves. Like there's like one part of us that wants to do this, and another part that wants to do that, and then there's this sort of something in the background, you might say a sort of an awareness consciousness that sees these actors sort of step on stage and these entities, these spirits or these sprites, seem to do what they want to do no matter what. And so it becomes a question of can there be a new demon or angel or whichever that's authentic to the moment, that can sort of shed a light on the old actors, all your old actors, all the people that want to shine on the poetic stage or whatever, all the tired shit. And so that becomes a struggle. So it's really hard to figure out in that circus of agency, you might say, what's really happening. So I really can't tell you sort of in a sort of unitary fashion, what I, Rodrigo Toscano, intended or don't intend. But I can tell you this, that there is this sort of this sort of edge of finality, and this is not a tragic sense of finality, but like a sort of something that I'm more open to embracing, more and more. Maybe it has to do with age and and the pandemics and all. But and I think from that deep well, I think is where I'd like to draw things from. Whoever just said that I'd like to, who knows, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
I wonder if there's in a way, there's always a sense of finality to every piece, isn't there? Like there's a sense of like, okay, this is it for the right now. It's just a matter of like defining the right now and having that be the continuation of your finality.
I don't know. There's these, there. I just sort of reference a sort of notion of ghost work within the confines of what we would call a self, but also there's these sort of interloping things that come in through language itself. That it's there's viruses, discursive viruses that sort of that glom onto things and mutate, and so watching that and I guess it's really just committing to being a spectator. I mean, truly a spectator. Even I think that when we're having a really heated conversation, we think, oh well, I'm the one that's talking. It really there's a sort of spectatorship that's happening that we don't give into it, and we sort of pretend like we're the ones that with the primary role or whatever.
I think artists have an easier time with mutation and transformation.
No, I think artists are speech bureaucrats. Like they're the biggest bureaucrats. I think that from my sense of artistry is my accumulated sense of artistry is precisely what gets in the way, I think, of something of what I would call authentic to the moment. I'm not trying to contradict you there, Edwin, but I'm saying that identification with the art, the artist or whatever, that's probably the most dangerous, I think.
I can see that. Yeah.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah, Christine.
Alan Capro, the happening man.
Exactly.
He had a concept of what he called unart, and he thought the purpose of going to art school was to learn how to unart yourself. I don't know how successful he was, but that was his aim.
Or Nicanor Parra's antipomes, right? They're thinking things in terms of negative. A would-be poem, a would-be moment, but that never arrives. But that is the artistry, so to speak.
Mm.
I had a question for Eli and Rodrigo. I was wondering about is there a somatic poetics of the pandemic? I mean, I think we talked a little bit in previous weeks that, what would the body and language look like in the context of now, right? That we have a lot of like facile discourses of like celebratory embodiment. And then we have a lot of like, the avant-garde needs to erase the body, right? And I think we're obviously somewhere in between, right? Where we need a kind of, nuanced discourse of embodiment. But maybe what would that look like in the present moment? Maybe just from your practice, right? Is there, if you're doing somatic stuff, how is it different now, right, than before? And Rodrigo, you mentioned the flame out, right? Is there a kind of process, right, or relationship to the body for a kind of flame out poetics in the present moment?
I mean, I think, whenever I hear like, the body, just that phrase, I think completely, it's not the body. I don't want the body.
I know you hate that question.
You're a Descartesian, freak. So I think if
Is
there
that a Cardi B reference?
about the bot,
Okay.
I think that's a sneak through. You know, that sneaks through. I think the body sneaks through is what I'd have to say.
Beautiful.
And then it's identified later. I think, you know, oh, that might have been a trace of you know, an eruption of some sort. But I want to say something just very quickly before I don't want to go. But I'm sorry. One thing about pandemics and social distancing is a poetics, right? I think that when we get over this pandemics, what we're going to find out is that we're going to be back to social distancing, if you know what I mean. It's like there's going to be a dread of going back and say, okay, well now we're in kind of normal time, and actually what we were doing before the pandemic is social distancing of all sorts, you know, ideological, social, psychological. I think there's a double dread here. We're doing social distancing now. Oh, we're all horrified and stuff. But when we come back, wait till that horror sets in. You find out that this culture, this North American culture, it's been a social distancing nightmare for a long time. I don't know, but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Great. Yeah.
I mean, I think that something that's been happening a lot for me, because I'm doing something that not everyone is doing, which is that I'm solo quarantining, right? Which means that like I live by myself. And I think that like the ways in which we have less access to each other, and the ways in which we have, you know, we don't necessarily have access to a public. I think that it's very interesting, even just like being in a space like this, because in a way it's like an accumulation of intimacies, right? As opposed to a crowd. There never really is a crowd, right? We don't really have the crowd. We don't have like the collective body. There's these kind of like shared individual intimacies. And I like that. I like that in a lot of ways. I think it's very interesting. And I think something that Jen Bartlett was talking about the other day, which is really important, is also sort of like, for me as someone who comes from chronic illness, sometimes I'm right now, like I'm feeling better, but like I spent a lot of time in the disability community, and you know, we have a lot of access issues with the way that we attend things, and the way that the sort of collective art community runs is like actually very very inaccessible for a lot of people for so many different reasons. And so, you know, I think that there is a really interesting way in which kind of like the act of social distancing is just, it's changing sociality, and it also has the opportunity to become, right? I feel like in a way, one of the ways that I'm going to survive the lack of touch is actually by being embodied, right? And so like one of the reasons why I do think that social distancing is so difficult is because a lot of people project their fears about the body onto sort of understanding themselves and their form through other people, through mirror, through performative reactivity, through role play. Like, I mean, not role play like the fun kind where it's, you know, intentional, but like the kind that we do every day, kind of institutional drag, you know? And so it's sort of like, you know, how is the home time sort of forcing us into an intimate relationship with others and ourselves, which is a different kind of intimacy. You know, I mean, and I think it, you know, I taught one of the lines in my piece is about kind of like softness, right? Sneaking through and sort of like the things that are inadmissible, like becoming admissible. And I think there's this really incredible opportunity right now to sort of like explore, you know, the soma in this other way, but it will take you through trauma. Right. So like it will take you through work that you don't necessarily want to do. And so I feel lucky because I've already been doing this work for like decades. Right. And so like now I arrive here and I'm like, oh, good. I'm just going to have an intensive somatics trauma, like, you know, residency for 2 years or whatever the fuck, you know, like that's now where we are. I know it's saying 2 years scares people, but like, y'all, I just don't think this is going away for a really long time, especially in New York. You know, I mean, for me, it's kind of like, what does it mean to regain a sort of relationship with myself and my surroundings that has a lot more to do with a certain kind of awareness. And I don't know, I don't really feel like I answered your question.
That was great. I like that in a way you're both kind of moving us away from the body, right? In one sense, because of how reductive, right, and what a trap it can be, but also because if you're living it and living it from a space of disability or whatever, then that's it. You don't need to kind of hypothesize the body. You're just, working through it. So
can I add something? I forget who was it that said, who's the guy, the main guy from Twitter? I forget that CEO's name, but very famous guy. He said that, actually, we know, way more about you or algorithms than in many angles than what you know about yourself or whatever. So I just wanted to throw that as a sort of caveat. So.
I love that you bring that up also. I mean, I'm a big sort of like, I'm not an anti-technology person. I mean, in fact, I think, I remember Gina, I think, was talking about architecture before, and I actually have an architecture and design background. And so like I teach architects at Pratt. And so I teach like sort of transdisciplinary writing and criticism to architects at Pratt. And, I work with them a lot around sort of the transition between working with like analog drawing and design and moving into computer tools. And there's an amazing essay by this guy, Stan Allen, and it's about sort of like the move into computer generated design and how, we really lose the possibility of tech when we attempt to use tech as if it was just a faster analog version, because in fact, it has a different intelligence than we do, and it organizes information and understands the world in a totally different way, and so I think like as we, move into this sort of interesting, hyper-local, intimate, like sort of mycelially connected, rhizomatic space, which we're in right now, like I am really interested in the ways that kind of tech can accelerate some of the moves that we're making.
What I think about is, the anarcho-tyranny under which we live. Really, we live the form of tyranny that we live under is not a spelled out one. It operates at the level of sort of anarchic, structures and forms that scramble things, and what I think what we're holding on to is sort of liberal forms of agency or imagined agency, where the individual is the sort of the analysand that we use to understand, like, not only our actions but others' actions. And I think that during this pandemic, where obviously the borders between self and the other and groups and other groups and borders and all the and how that sort of hyper permeated. I mean, I think that's going to create a different form of even a repressed form of massification that's different than the form of massification that we imagined before. Because even when we look at like, remember Maoist China, or we look at forms of massification that we think we've identified, we do it from a sort of a liberal, I mean, it's a big L, old, not liberal conservative, but like classical liberal lens. And I think that what we're facing here is some very, very upcoming embarrassing things. Things are gonna have to be put on the table, and one of those things are, will we continue with this anarcho tyrannical liberal subjectivity, I think. So I think in terms of poetics, I think that's going to be, you could actually just kind of line poetic phenomenon along that way. So, here's the sort of a, here's your priors, liberal conception of liberation. To me, finished. Like, I don't want to hear it. And because I think that we're in a danger of enforcing the very thing that's got us all extremely screwed up. And so I think that's going to be very interesting in the next year or so, what artists do and poets do, how they respond to this,
Edwin, I'm actually going to have to leave.
So, yeah, it's time. Thank you.
Thank you all for a fabulous event.
Thank you all. Good night for a great conversation. Do you guys want to hang out a little, or?
Are we going to another
What's
bar?
that?
Are we going to
No,
another
we go
bar?
to another
Let's go to another
bar.
bar.
I'm coming, Rodrigo.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you want to come? You better be.
They,
I
they
really
make-
love
they-
everybody. I really love
Rest-
everybody's talk.
What's that, Elizabeth?
I really actually love everybody's talk of space, the space around the body as something that you would eat, or buoyant, and also the space between words and the space relationship around a body of words. So I really loved, like, in not talking about the body, you're talking about the space around it, and as company, as buoyant, as alive, as has DNA in it, has moisture, it has like everything you're talking about. So as company, as support, without actually talking about the body, it's like the space inside the same as the space outside. So I just really loved everyone was bringing up space in a really beautiful way, like a thread through everybody. It was really nice.
Somebody that allows the world in can address what's happening a lot clearer in that way. So. I went down a rabbit hole there. Oh, I did that, and look at George's painting on the wall. It's like, oh, and he's back. George, we're talking about your painting.
Thank you. I never left. I was just walking away from the camera.
We all never left.
You know, your statement about the body and liberal, I'm not sure I'm following what you're saying, actually, because the word body means a very different thing to somebody who has a practice of the body, to somebody who just relates to the body as an idea or unconsciously. I mean, if you have a practice of the body, you're seeing things differently. You're seeing things through the body. And if your practice is deep enough, you know you're not separate from other people. You know that the way we language things and the way we conceptualize things through that language distances us from what we actually know in ourselves. Not about oneself versus other people. It's not about, those boundaries aren't real. They're configured intellectually according to cultural traditions and intellectual traditions, which are particularly highly defined in the West in certain ways, and not necessarily universally. You know, there are other ways of thinking about things. So you missed my discussion, so it's a little hard for me to sort of enter into the conversation with you, because I'm thinking from the point of view, do you know Bateson's work, for instance, Gregory Bateson, or the anthropologist who attempted to get us to think ecologically as a way of mind, not as an intellectual concept, but as actually a way of experiencing the world. And my view of
super influential for me. Shocking.
What did you just say? I didn't hear you.
I said Bateson's work was really like formative for me. So yeah.
Yeah, it's the beginning of a whole new chapter. And unfortunately, it hasn't really caught on. You don't really find that many people who know Bateson's work right now. I think you and I probably are the only two people here who've actually read Bateson. I studied with him briefly when I taught at Naropa that first summer of Naropa, that he was teaching there also.
Well, and
So
I know his daughter, Nora, who actually is quite brilliant.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and well, I'm kind of part of this like sort of international like futurist peer-to-peer network, and so like I think it's also weird to just be in the United States sometimes, because there really is like quite a lot of systems thinking that that does have roots in Bateson that goes on in other countries, Latin American countries and Europe, and honestly like in New Zealand and in Australia. I mean, really like these kind of things that are pretty prevalent in other parts of the world, and that there's pretty active conversations happening. around.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, in a certain sense, if you look at it from an ecological perspective, the way that Bateson did, we're not really thinking in a way appropriate to this world situation. And one of the interesting things about our present challenge of pandemic is it's breaking all of the ties that are holding the Western view in place. That's kind of what I was trying to get at in my piece, that the gravitational pull that sustains the view of reality that is dominant in our culture, that's actually produced a war culture. A capitalist culture is a war culture. They work together. They support each other. You have to continue to stimulate the situation so that those in control can continue to be in control. And that's all. The underpinnings of that is the way we think, actually. And it doesn't seem to be any willingness to rethink on that larger level. So in a certain sense, the earth is making us do it. Or however, the sense of agency is a little hard here, because if we assign agency to the environment or we assign agency to ourselves, both are false. Agency is happening at a different level, actually. And we don't really have the ability to track it, because we want to think the way we already think, and we want to live the lives we already. So basically, the pandemic is experienced as what's being taken away from me. And of course, you have to think that way because people are starving and people are losing their jobs and people are out of work, going nuts, actually. People are really going crazy in this situation because they're unprepared to discover a new center of balance in themselves. They don't have the tools to do that. So the thinking is going to occur at a much larger level. And I think it's very important how we think as individuals personally, because I don't think we're separate from everybody else. I think that the way we think affects each other. I don't really think the body is self-contained. I think I have this idea that I mentioned earlier called eco-proprioception, because I'm quite certain that we are picking up tremendous amounts of data from the environment and we're editing it out. The brain is an editor and it's instructed according to the patterns that we have accepted. Our body movements are connected to our intellectual positions. They're held in place. Very often when people have a significant trauma in the body, they start to think very differently afterward, because the center of control is no longer there the way it once was. Anyway, this is a vast subject and we're kind of dipping in it a little haphazardly here, but I just want to just sort of stake out the territory a bit and say that, we got to be more humble about our theories of things. I call it slimming down on opinion. We have to slim down on opinion and pay more attention to how things are operating outside of our conceptual frame. Frames are being broken right now. And, we'll do everything possible as a civilization to simply cover that up, move on without it, bury the things that have come up and get back in control, get as much back of our lives as we can, because there are human issues at stake here, and you understand why people need to think that way. They're trying to survive. But those of us who are not in the position of worrying about surviving in the most immediate sense need to think differently. We need to think interactively in a different way. And we raise the question of poetics, about what kind of poetics is necessary. The roots of possible poetics are there. I'm not going to say who I think those people are, but we just haven't experienced their possibility yet. We haven't really explored what language can be. And it's great that we do these things artistically, but the question is, how are we using language when we think? Read a book there's a book of Bateson's called Steps Toward an Ecology of Mind. In his second book called Mind and Nature, collection of his lectures and so on that happened late in his life, Basically, the sense you get is that we don't know how to think. We need to retool fundamentally, think very, very differently. And your body is your laboratory. To be able to develop alternative ways of thinking, you have your own practice of your body, of the awareness of how you operate and how your mind works, how you cancel out the things you don't want to look at, you don't want to think about. Tremendous amount of data is just pushed by the wayside. We live in the country, so we have a lot of opportunity to experience our interaction with the environment in a very different way from city living. Anyway, sorry, I don't mean to lecture people about something that we can't really talk about in great depth at this point.
I loved that lecture. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you, George.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Sound off here.
Allowing like this cross-referencing of each other, to have a forum, to have a place where we can all, just interchange that way.
Thank you. It's been like a life and art lab for the past few weeks. I'm going to miss it, once it's over tomorrow night. So.
No, it's been great. Thank you. Yeah. All right. I think that's it for tonight.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good night.
Bye,
Thank you.
Gina.
Bye bye.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Yeah, see you tomorrow.
Okay.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.
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 Nice to
I'll
meet
let you know when the recorded thing is done. I'll let you guys know. Bye bye.
Okie dokie, bye.
Ciao.